right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll call to order the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals regular meeting for July 24th, 2019. The first item on our agenda is a consideration of the minutes from our regular meeting from June 26th, 2019. Those minutes were provided to the board members. Are there any changes necessary to those?
No, sir.
If not, those will stand as approved. As written, and next we'll move to new business. I've got a couple of special use permits. The first one is application Z19022 by Ben Spell of Good Ranchers. They were requesting a special use permit to operate a temporary vendor business, in this case food sales, on property in the Commercial Highway District, and this is for a piece of property at 1720 Old Fort Parkway. Mr. Blomley, it's nice to have you back, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chairman Young. It's good to be back, and good afternoon, Chairman Young and members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Our first item today is, as you mentioned, a special use permit to operate a temporary vending business, and this is packaged food sales, so it's not food for consumption on site. It's prepackaged steaks and other raw meats. They would like to set up in, or Good Ranchers is the name of the applicant, and Good Ranchers would like to set up in the parking lot of the Stones River Mall from August 8th through September the 16th. And their setup would be basically the day before, and it would be a 24-hour tear down of their operation. They would operate out of a 20 by 20 tent, and they would also have a pickup truck there parked as well during the daytime. The staff has reviewed the application with respect to the both the standards of general applicability and the standards for temporary vending operations, and find that the application generally meets all of the criteria. I'll go over a few things with you. The location. So we have a site plan. It's we actually would like one that's a little bit more detailed, but the general location we feel comfortable with bringing to you. You'll see that it is right here. It's hard to see on this site plan, but it is in front of the area. If you know where the kind of lifestyle center component is of Stones River Mall, and you went straight out toward the end of the parking lot, closer to Old Fort Parkway, closer to where Mall Circle Drive comes in off of Old Fort Parkway, it would be right there at the end of the parking lot. The applicant has provided a letter from Sterling Organization, who is the owner of the Stones River Mall property, the owner and operator of Stones River Mall property, demonstrating that they do have permission to set up on the mall's property, and they've also provided a letter from the mall granting them permission to use the restrooms inside the building. So here is a photograph facing Old Fort Parkway of where they would like the tent to be located. The applicant understands that he must continue to comply with all of the standards outlined in the zoning ordinance for temporary vending. Staff believes that there's plenty of parking on site to accommodate the use. I'd say at this time of year, that location of the parking lot is not kind of, for practical purposes, surplus parking. The site is close enough to a fire hydrant. As I mentioned, they do have restroom facilities available. They will be using a generator on site. They will not be installing any kind of temporary power. They'll just have a generator for the lighting for the tent. There will be no on-site consumption of the product. I would feel sorry for someone who might attempt to do that. That might not be a good idea. I'm sure their product is very good cooked. If the board decides to grant this special use permit request, staff recommends the following conditions. In addition to compliance with the sign ordinance, the site must also comply with all of the terms of the Stones River Mall PSO. And a PSO is Planned Signage Overlay Zoning. That larger commercial and industrial sites are eligible to apply for their own kind of tailor-made signage package. And so 8 or 9 years ago, the mall, when it was redeveloping, had a PSO approved so that there are additional signage regulations in addition to our sign ordinance. So they'll have to comply with both our sign ordinance and the PSO zoning overlay for the mall. The tent shall be weighted above ground. There's number 2, the tent shall be weighted above ground, and no stakes or other appurtenances penetrating the surface of the parking lot shall be used to anchor the tent. And they have agreed to anchoring it above ground with blocks or water barrels, something of that nature. We just don't want the parking lot to be damaged or any utilities under the parking lot that may be there to be damaged. Number 3, an electrical permit must be obtained for electricity to the tent, and the site must pass an electrical safety inspection prior to beginning operation. Number 4, a tent permit must be obtained from the Building and Codes Department prior to the tent being erected. Number 5, a more detailed site plan drawn to scale and showing the exact location of the tent shall be submitted for review and approval of the Planning and Transportation Departments prior to the issuance of the tent permit. And number 6, additional traffic control measures, possibly including type 3 barricades, may be required by the Transportation Department prior to beginning operation. So we would just like for the Transportation Department to take a look at it to make sure that there are no other traffic control measures warranted prior to the tent being erected. With that being said, Mr. Ben Spell with Good Ranchers is here. If you have any questions for him, I'll be happy to answer any questions as well, and we do need to conduct a public hearing on this matter today.
Thank you, Matthew. The tent, did you say it was going to be up 24 hours a day, or is it?
Yes, the tent will be there 24 hours a day. I believe the vehicle will be moved at the end of the business day. Yes, sir. And he's nodding yes. Okay.
Any other questions for staff at this point? Mr. Spells, anything you'd like to add to the application?
In tandem with
if you wouldn't mind coming up to, excuse me, sorry about that. If you wouldn't mind coming to the podium so we get your comments.
Thank you, guys. In tandem with our sales, we partner with the Second Harvest Food Bank, and our location is a drop-off site for non-perishable food items, and a portion of our proceeds go back right to Middle Tennessee. That's it.
Thank you. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. If there's anyone wishing to speak for or against this application, if you'd come to the podium and give us your name and address. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussion or a motion.
This is just I don't have anything against the application, just an observation. I've been at one of these, patronizing one of these locations on a Saturday afternoon at lunchtime, and this parking area is packed. So I'm hoping the applicant, that I don't know how many places you're going to take up, but that there wasn't a whole lot of spaces left. So I don't know when, I guess y'all have looked at it to feel like that there was ample parking. I mean, I know you mentioned that in your comments, so.
I think on-site, and I may have misspoken when I said that it was surplus parking. I do realize that when we have taken our aerial photographs was prior to the opening of the movie theater.
Right.
But with that being said, the site as a whole has enough parking. It's just a matter of whether people want to walk.
Correct.
So around back, there's typically quite a bit of surplus parking.
Absolutely. Okay.
Question, how many spaces do you anticipate this taking up?
With a 20 by
Maybe for you, maybe for him, I'm not sure.
With a 20 by 20 tent, that would be roughly 4 parking spaces.
Yeah.
Or yeah, probably about 4 to 6 parking spaces. Mm-hmm. And then you factor in the parking of their vehicle and their customer parking. So I'd say all in all, it could take up about 12 to 14 spaces total.
Do we anticipate this being a yearly event, or is this a one-time?
We would like for it to be yearly, yes. during about the same time. We were in the Nashville area last year around this time. We in Franklin, and even in tandem with this event that hopefully we'll get approved for here, we'll be in Franklin at Opry Mills, Cool Springs in Franklin, Opry Mills, Rivergate Mall, Lebanon Premium Outlets, and we'll also be in one other location to the northeast that I can't think of the name. So we kind of our business model is to have multiple locations in a city. That way we can really drive through advertising that people, and they don't have to drive as far. And so, because when we were here last year, how we found out about Murfreesboro is there were so many people emailing us, Facebooking us, calling us, saying, hey, come to Murfreesboro, come to Murfreesboro, come to Murfreesboro. So toward the end of our events at those other locations that we had last year, we contacted them all. They said, sure. We came, I don't know if this is bad to say, but we actually set up without having a permit last year. Because we didn't.
Yeah, we let them know.
We didn't know. We asked them all, well, we always ask the malls what we need. They said they didn't, that we didn't need anything. Right. So we set up, and then we quickly.
You asked the owner in
Yes,
this.
yes, absolutely.
relying
They took
on.
our money and then and then said, "Oh, you have to shut down." So, so here we are, a year later, hoping to get permission this time.
All right, thank you, sir.
So in years to come, if this is approved, this would become administratively approved as to other temporary vendors, special use permits that have been previously approved the same?
It would, the repeat temporary vendor special use permits, they are only allowed to be approved administratively if it's the same applicant in the exact same location with the exact same setup. So if they, say there was another meat company that comes in next year and wants to make application, they'd have to come back before you. And then also if there are, if we determine throughout the time frame that they're set up there that there are issues with that particular location in the parking lot, then we could require them, rather than us approving it administratively next year, to come back to y'all if we find that location doesn't work out well.
Sure. I was just making sure that my assumption was correct. This would be treated the same as fireworks stands
correct.
and other food vendors that we've seen in the past.
That's correct.
You may not have to come back to see us again.
But you still have
I
to
know
make an
you'll be
application
disappointed.
with us, so
You have to make application. You just won't have to come see us.
save you a plane
in this
ticket
room.
here in this meeting.
But I just wanted to make sure that I understood those procedures. So I appreciate that, Mr. Plumley.
Sure.
I move for approval of the request, subject to the conditions outlined by the staff that were itemized by Mr. Bromley.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Are there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That application has been approved. Thank you, sir. For our next application, I'll pass it to Matthew and let him make an introduction for us.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Young. I'd like to introduce Jafar Ware to you. Jafar is our newest planner. He's been with us since February, and so we're trying to get him some experience in various facets of our department. He's done a great job since he's been with us. He's hit the ground running. So this has been his first special use permit request that he has reviewed and written the comments for. And Jafar comes to us from the state of Tennessee. He was in a different career path and decided that he was interested in coming to work for the city of Murfreesboro and choosing a different career path as a planner. Jafar has his master's in public administration from UTC, I believe.
Yes, sir.
And his bachelor's from Kennesaw State in Georgia. So we're pleased to have Jafar here, and Chairman Young, I'll pass it back to you, and Jafar will be presenting this next
All right.
item for us.
That's good to have you. And this application we're dealing with is application Z19023 by Ken Anderson of Franklin Road Baptist Church. They're requesting a special use permit for a recreational field at an institutional group assembly use on property that's in a single-family residential RS-15 district. And this is for property located at 138 through 154 Gresham Lane. If you review that for us, Mr. Ware.
Sure. Good afternoon. Franklin Road Baptist Church is requesting a special use permit to construct a recreation field for soccer in accordance with the City of Murfreesboro's zoning ordinance. Chart 1 allows for the recreation field use in the single-family residential zoning district with approval of a special use permit. The project area is within the city limits, located at 138 and 154 Gresham Lane. The portion addressed as 154 Gresham Lane is zoned RS-15, and the other address is zoned local commercial, which does not require a special use permit because the use is permitted by right per the zoning ordinance. The applicant proposes to develop a soccer field and 58 new parking spaces. The parking spaces that are proposed does not need a special use permit because it's allowed by right. The field will be used for soccer games, Franklin Road Christian Church athletic activities, and by Franklin Road Baptist Church for occasional outdoor activities. The applicant proposes to install a Type B buffer and an 8-foot tall privacy fence to shield the residential lot to the north of the field. The old site plan that was listed in the application had a typo. It had a typo, but it should be 8 feet tall for that fence along the north of the field.
Yep. And excuse me, Mr. Ware, I was just going to mention that I put the site plan on the screen before you. What Mr. Ware is referencing is a new site plan that was submitted to us this morning that had a typo with regards to the height of the privacy fence. And so it's not in your packets, but it's on the screen right now because it just came in an hour or two before the meeting.
And also, staff spoke to the applicant yesterday regarding a 4-foot fence that's going to go along Gresham Lane to prevent errant balls from getting into the field or getting into the street, and also a mesh netting that it can be raised to 12 feet high is also going to be installed along Gresham Lane, and that's on the new site plan that was submitted this morning. The following are findings for standards of general applicability for special use permits. Number 1, the proposed use will not have a substantial or undue adverse effect. For this proposal, there is adequate parking and access to the site. A Type B landscape buffer will be installed, and also a privacy fence will be installed along the north property line. Number 2, the proposed building will be constructed, arranged, and operated as to not interfere with the development and adjacent property use. For this proposal, no new building structures will be constructed. Number 3, the proposed buildings or use will be served adequately by essential public facilities and services. For the soccer field, in this proposal, all the items have already been provided for the site. Number 4, the proposed use will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of any feature determined by the BZA to be of a significant natural, scenic, or historic importance. The proposal will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of any of these listed. And number 5, the use complies with all additional standards imposed on it. And to that, the staff recommends the following conditions of approval. No lighting is requested or permitted with this special use permit. In the future, if lighting is desired, it will require amending the special use permit. Number 2, no outdoor amplification is allowed with this use except on an infrequent basis associated with special church events. The use of the proposed athletic field shall operate in a manner that is consistent with the City of Murfreesboro's noise ordinance. Number 3, the applicant shall apply for and obtain approval of a site plan for the athletic field and new parking area. Number 4, the parcels at 138 and 154 Gresham Lane must be combined with the main church lot via re-subdivision plat. And number 5, the site plan should be revised to demonstrate compliance with the minimum 10-foot width for a Type B landscape buffer. And that, Mr. Chairman, concludes my staff report.
Thanks, sir. Any questions for staff at this point? All right, anything the applicant would like to add? Is Mr. Anderson?
Mr. Scott Gravy is here representing the church.
Anything you'd like to add to the presentation? Okay. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. If there's anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussion or motion.
Could I ask a question with regard to the language of an infrequent basis associated special church events? I'm curious if there's any limitations on that, what that's meaning, what the intention was between the applicant and the city.
The church already has a soccer field on site on their property that's listed in the county, and they already use it for different events, and it's on an infrequent basis. They'll just continue that use on the new proposed soccer field. So like church activities after Sunday, and I guess Mr. Gravy can speak further to that if you like. That's what the staff understands.
But not like every Sunday. It's not just regular church events, not every Sunday. If you don't mind.
Historically, we've had like a yearly homecoming. We'll have that under a tent. We're just going to continue how we're using the existing soccer field, which is adjacent to the same neighbor, just on a different side. Mm-hmm. So that usage will continue. There's nothing additional planned.
Okay. I just didn't know what it meant, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Anything else? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
I would add that Mr. Gravy did provide a letter signed by both the church and the neighbor to the north, signed by, and it's in your packets, signed by Dr. Mike Norris and Mike Graves, who's their neighbor, basically outlining that Mr. Graves is consenting to the proposed application.
So he's not going to have soccer fields on both sides of him. He's just going to have it to the south rather than to the north. It just was in the county before, and now it's in the city. Understand?
Any further discussion? Are there?
I'll move for approval. Move for approval subject to the recommended conditions of approval laid out by staff.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? There are none, so that application's been approved. Thank you for your time. Our next application is administrative appeal. It's application S19024 by Mr. Charles Stoffel of Columbia Neon. This is appealing an administrative decision by the Director of Building and Codes related to off-premise signage. And this is for property located in the Light Industrial District, located along the east side of South Church Street, identified in the tax map 113C. Mr. Blomley or Mr. Holtzman, maybe you're the...
I believe Mr. Holtz will be taking care of this one.
You can if
Tackle
you
this one
want
for
to.
us.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, since I'm up here, this has to do with a sign. I have a PowerPoint that they just put up there for you. Let's see if I can get this to work correctly. Slideshow from beginning. Okay. So obviously, this has to do with a sign. Let me give you the location of the sign. It is next to Cracker Barrel on Church Street. And it is also in front of Baymont Inn and Suites. This segment of road, I think if my mouse is showing up, is actually part of Church Street. Now over here, I wish the mouse could work better here. This section is what we know as Church Street. This is the off-ramp here if you're coming from Joe B. Jackson or Mont Eagle to get onto Church Street going to City Hall. So I think this little triangle shape of land is where the sign is located, and you might see the shadow of the sign. That's the sign we are discussing. That sign was built with the original Cracker Barrel store back in 1975. We issued a permit for the sign. In 1975, and here's a copy of the actual permit that we issued. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner of that application, you'll see where a small diagram that has a service road, and then right above that has sign, and it's pointing at a short little line. To the left of that line is a rectangle. That's what we'd believe to be the original Cracker Barrel store. And then the larger lines surrounding all that is what we believe to be the property at the time the sign application and sign permit were issued. Additionally, we have a site plan from when the original Cracker Barrel was built. Just an interesting note, Cracker Barrel used to sell fuel. And so you'll see to the left of the building some fuel pumps. But in the circled area to, I guess, in front of the Cracker Barrel building, you'll see a red circle. That's where we believe the sign was originally installed, on that same lot of record as the Cracker Barrel store. And we're going to kind of maybe justify that a little bit with this picture of the original sign. If you'll notice in the picture, the cars parked here, and they appear to be in front of the sign poles. We believe those would be the cars parked in these parking spaces right in here. So we believe whoever took this picture was standing back in here somewhere. And the point I'm really trying to make to you at this moment is we had every reason to believe at the time and up until 2003 that that sign was an on-site sign for Cracker Barrel. I'm sorry I can't get this thing to work right. At that time, the city did not regulate signs except through the building code, was strictly structural enforcement. Footings, wind load, stuff like that. It had nothing to do with on-site or off-site signs. We didn't have a sign ordinance regulating the size or anything. So in 1984, we adopted our first sign ordinance. So Cracker Barrel and the sign built in 1975, 1984, we adopted our first sign ordinance. 1997 is the first time we included regulation of off-site signage. And that regulation in the sign ordinance in 1997 regulated off-site signs to be on property directly connected to interstate right-of-way, and it had to be at least 1,000 feet from an interchange. In 2003, 2004, Cracker Barrel decided to rebuild on that same lot. They actually, we believe, purchased property behind the existing store and built the new Cracker Barrel store as we know it today. And at the same time, they submitted an application for an on-site interstate sign. And at the review of that application is at the point we've first discovered that the sign we've been talking about is on an adjacent lot of record. So the first slide I showed you where it showed you location in that triangle, it's currently on a separate lot of record. But we believe originally it was part of the original Cracker Barrel store. Somewhere along the line, property lines got moved. But in 2003, 2004 is when we discovered it on a separate lot of record. At some point after that, Columbia Neon installed a sign, we believe around 2006. Well, Cracker Barrel built their new sign, put Cracker Barrel in it. Cracker Barrel was taken out of the old sign. Sometime around 2006, Columbia Neon installed a Sims Realtor auctioneer sign without permits. The state got involved. He was asked to go to the state to get an off-site sign permit. The state denied that off-site sign permit. They felt like the sign was originally built to advertise Cracker Barrel. It was never built to be an off-site sign. So the state will not issue him a permit for an off-site interstate sign. So we have a copy of the state denial letter from back in 2007. The state denied his sign application. They gave him the opportunity to file for an appeal and gave him 60 days to remove that sign face. He made application for an administrative hearing, and sometime before the administrative hearing, he made a settlement with what we believe a settlement with the state to change that sign from Sims Realty to, as you'll see on the PowerPoint, lot for sale. So now this just becomes a big sign advertising that lot it's on for sale. No different than a realtor putting a sign in someone's front yard where they're selling a house, for sale, realtor's name. The state approved that. Columbia Neon made application with us to install that same sign. I think a reasonable person would say, yeah, that's on-premise advertising. He's selling the lot that the sign's on. So we thereby issued a permit. He chose not to go back to the state to appeal the decision. So he made application for, and we permitted a on-site sign, lot for sale. And that's what it looked like that he finally put up. In 2017, we had a windstorm come through. Yeah, the story continues. 2017, we had a storm come through Murfreesboro. It blew out that sign face. And it remains, the sign remained blank up until fall of last year, when we noticed that Bullseye, Gun Gear, and Pawn sign was put there. And it's actually advertising a building, a business on a different street. We sent Columbia Neon a notice of violation in December 28, 2018, to fix the problem. And he has chosen to appeal our decision, telling him he's in violation of the sign ordinance. So basically, we're recommending that you not approve his variance. First of all, based on the fact that the state has denied his off-site sign application. Normally, if the city is going to issue a permit for an off-site sign, we require them to give us a copy where the state approved it. So he can't give us that documentation. Additionally, to change the use of this sign to an off-site sign, the sign ordinance says it has to be 1,000 feet from interchange, has to directly connect to interstate right-of-way, which he does not. So for those reasons, we're recommending you not approve his variance. If you have any questions, comment. Oh. Really an appeal. Appeal, I'm sorry, appeal, I'm sorry. Forgive me.
When you say off-site sign, are you, should we, layman's terms, a billboard type sign?
Similar to what a billboard
Any sort
does,
of
yes.
It's billboards in town or on the interstate, it falls under those?
Yeah. The state regulates signs directly connected to the interstate or really off-site premise advertising altogether.
So the billboards even through the middle of town is something regulated?
Some of those are so old they're grandfathered in. We have documentation or proof that before we started our sign ordinance, it was off-premise advertising. This sign differs, in fact, by the fact that we believe it was built on the same lot as Cracker Barrel. And somewhere property lines got changed. When it came to the state's attention and they went out and investigated, they made the determination that it's so close to Cracker Barrel that they couldn't justify it being off-premise advertising.
They just assumed it's going to be a sign to advertise Cracker Barrel.
On that,
That's really
on that lot of record.
Right, even though it may not, it's, even this little triangle, you think is it its own piece of property, or is it part of the Cracker Barrel?
We think it was part of Cracker Barrel at one time. The old Cracker Barrel store. We think it was a part of the old Cracker Barrel store. We have no documentation showing us differently.
If it was advertising for Cracker Barrel, then it would meet the on-site signage regulations.
Yes.
Even though it's close to the interstate and regulated by the state, it would be permitted to advertise for Cracker Barrel.
If on that lot of record. When it's an on-premise sign, it's not regulated by the state. It's when he put Sims Realty on it that it become off-premise advertising. That's when the state gets involved.
If it was truly a sign to sell that piece of property, if that little triangle was its own lot and could be sold, then a temporary sign that says this lot's for sale would be permissible for a reasonable amount of time?
There's no limit.
Okay.
There's no limit. Well, we issued a permit for the lot for sale sign simply because the typical realtor sign is what we call a temporary sign, under 32 square feet, not less than 12 foot high. And we don't require a permit for those. Once you exceed that, we require a permit.
Okay.
So he could advertise, use that sign to advertise that lot for sale as an on-premise sign.
Okay.
That makes
I
sense.
took up the questions. Feel free to.
Well, you may have said this, but where it's presently located, forget what the sign says, just the structure itself, is less than 1,000 feet from the interstate interchange,
Yes, it is.
So that's
It's
one.
less than
Okay.
1,000 feet, yes.
for sure.
Yes.
And then,
I mean, the original map showed you could see the off-ramp a few hundred feet from this.
yeah, and I just,
I understand.
what are we calling the interchange and, and that proximity from that too. The property as a whole indicated it was owned by Miss Brown, and I guess she leased the premises to Cracker Barrel? And then she sold off a portion to Columbia Neon, so. And I think you explained the difference between off-site and on-site. So the other question I had is, where is the gun store? Is it located right behind the Cracker Barrel?
Do you know where Shelby Street is? Or?
Yeah, and I'm trying to, is it tie into?
If they go back to my
back
PowerPoint,
of-
I might be able to.
As I look at that aerial, can't point, but where 2115 is Cracker
Yeah,
Barrel.
if you look at the top
Is that
right corner of that
212?
map, it's further back that
So
way,
that's 212, further back, far,
upper right.
I guess, northeast.
Yeah, there's no connection between the
Okay.
lot where this sign is.
Okay,
It's both up from, looking at the picture.
Up and over.
Up and over to the right.
okay,
On a
yeah,
different lot of record.
okay. And so there's not, regardless of what the sign says, I guess it's not a Cracker Barrel sign, which would, by extension, you're saying would be on site and would be no problem.
If it was on the same lot as Cracker Barrel and was advertising Cracker Barrel.
And even though it's not now,
It's not now.
you're saying by extension it would be.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. When Cracker Barrel rebuilt, they installed a new ground sign to replace this one.
all right.
But this sign wasn't removed.
So you couldn't have both of them on the same lot. So, I'm sorry, what was your question?
This sign wasn't, they rebuilt a sign, but they never removed the old one.
Correct.
They changed the sign
They
face.
just changed the face, they didn't remove it, they didn't change the
Right.
structure.
Probably had no work done to it, but the sign face changed.
If this lot sold and like a, I don't know, food truck decided to, I mean, I know that that would require additional approval. Like if some teeny tiny business was in there, would that teeny tiny business be able to advertise on that sign? Not without-
It'd be off-premise advertising,
No, she's,
Even if there was some teeny little business, like
yeah,
a
if you
tiny
could-
little coffee shop or a food truck or some
If-
sort of
if-
little business wanted a permanent,
If they went through
Hot dog
I'm not sure if
vendor,
that
something
lot's
like
big
that.
enough to develop on to handle a building and parking, to be honest with you, and the landscaping.
well, that's why I was
But
like,
if you could.
like a food
if you-
truck kind of size
Yeah, I know.
business.
If you could fit the building and the parking on there, yes, that could be used to advertise.
And that sign would remain there, and that would be the sign, the business's sign, on-site sign.
Yeah.
But that's part of the problem, is that that's not really a lot that can be sold for
Yeah,
development.
it's just been chopped up to a small little segment. That-
I'm gonna go back to another question. Paragraph, it says on April 9th, 2010, Columbia Neon made application for on-site permanent sign permit
Let's see.
to install a new sign face in that Cracker Barrel sign.
Didn't this-
And at that time, it was issued, inspected, and was fine. And then a storm happens. So is it still going back to the fact that at that point in time, I mean, y'all are saying, I think this is saying it was an on-site permanent sign permit at the time.
Well, on
Just that
April 9th,
storm blew it out.
on April 9th, 2010, he was making application to put lot for sale, Sims Realty.
Okay,
And that would be.
That lot.
That lot, selling that lot.
okay.
That was our understanding. We wondered, but, you know, there wasn't enough to deny that, so.
Okay.
If another business bought that land, would they still be operating under this lot for sales sign permit? Or would they would have to get a new permit too, wouldn't they?
To put a sign face in it, yes, you have to get a permit.
Even if you bought the property that had a prior permit with the different sign face?
Every time you change the sign
Sign
face,
face,
you
you
would.
gotta get-
Yeah, you have to get a permit.
So even if,
The only time we wouldn't require a permit if it was an off-site sign. So the signs, billboards along the interstate, they change the faces all the time, no permits are required.
But
and those are approved,
On-site signs, you have to get a permit.
but those are also approved by the state before we approve them.
Yes, correct.
okay.
Yeah. The state doesn't require a permit to change the face. We didn't see any reason to muddy the water with it either.
Any further questions for Mr. Holtz at this point? Thank you, sir.
I'll be here if you have any more questions.
Okay. Mr. Stoffels, anything you'd like to add? Or Representative, sure, if you'd come to the podium and provide us with any comments you may have.
I'm Charles Stoffel with Columbia Neon Company. I've been working in this area over here for over 50 years. Columbia Neon Company owns the property, also owns the sign. This thing was dumped in Mr. Holt's lap, but it's a lot more to it that hadn't been brought out. I had taken my time to have my secretary write a nice letter to you people and brought it over to Mr. Bromley to ask him. I had 6 copies of it, to ask him to be sure and get a copy to each of y'all so y'all could evaluate and make a good decision on this sign. And for some reason it was left out. Of what was sent to you. I have got the same copies right here. With your permission, I'd like to hand it to you where we could clear up what exactly went on this sign, if I could possibly do that.
Mr. Stoffel, I believe I've put everything that you submitted to us in the packet, beginning with the letter right there. If we could bring up
Dated July 8th, 2019.
Yep, we could bring up that's your letter.
Have you got all the packet? This would give history and so forth on it, if I could. Is that in the packet? I knew it'd be very confusing, so I was wanting to lay it out exactly what went on, where y'all could make a decision, vote it up or down. That's y'all's decision, but I would like for you to know all the facts of it.
Okay.
It wasn't in my packet that you sent me.
Here's what they got. I believe that was everything that you submitted.
No, sir, that wasn't.
It wasn't?
No,
Okay.
sir, that's altogether different. Could I hand this to the chairman, let him compare it? Would that be possible? This is what I brought over to you. I asked you to please get this to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Is that not the same letter, July 8th?
That's the same letter, but it hadn't got the documentation in behind it that
Let me look through and see what
you would, please.
Yeah, I mean, in his letter, he's referencing a survey that was dated June the 13th, 2003, and I may be missing it.
You talking about this last page?
I don't know. I can't tell. Probably so, though. Oh, yeah, it is. It is. I see it now.
It's just not dated. I mean, this is,
Well,
copy is not dated, so we don't know.
It's dated on the front.
Okay.
I didn't see that.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't, it wasn't in mine that was sent to me. But if it was, that sounds wonderful. It was, one thing I'd like to clear up now, I've been fighting for about 17 months on trying to prove that the sign was an off-premise sign from the very time it was installed. And I've sent them maps. I've gone back and got maps of before they built the interstate highway, sent them maps that way, I've sent them surveys, everything I know how. The 8th of this month, when I was over to turn my information in to Mr. Bromley, the lady that did research it for the city said she still wasn't convinced that the sign wasn't on the Cracker Barrel property at one time. And I believe that's the same thing that you feel like, that it was on the Cracker Barrel property. If I could, I'd like to hand you this information right here that gives a simple synopsis of exactly every deed that it's been all the way through, and proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the sign was always an off-premise sign. That's been my contention from the very start. It's always been an off-premise sign. They've confused it around that it was somehow cut off of the Cracker Barrel property. That's completely erroneous. So if I could get that over to you, get y'all's help on that, I'd certainly appreciate it. That's 2 copies
Okay.
of it. That's all he needs. That's exactly what he's needing.
Mr. Chairman, can we take a minute and get copies of that so everybody can see it, including staff? But
Take a recess, and we'll be back in 5 minutes to finish up. All right, we'll get back in session here. We were provided by the applicant timelines of deeds and property transfers from 1968 through 2013. So we've seen those documents presented, been entered into the record there. So anything you'd like to add after those documents, or?
No, sir, just that I'd like to state that it was always an off-premise sign. That's what I've maintained from the very start. Anytime it was any question would come up about it, tell them, now look, that's an off-premise sign. It has always been an off-premise sign. And then they'd start this stuff about on-premise and things of that nature. But it's always anything that was handled that was under my protest, that I protested from the very start, that it was off-premise sign, and it had always been an off-premise sign. Every letter that I'd ever written concerning it, off-premise sign from the very start, and that's what I maintain, and I'd like for y'all to weigh that in. I can go back and tell you exactly where the mistake was made from the very start, if you would be interested in it.
If you'd like to provide that to us, that's fine.
Sir?
If you'd like to provide that information to
Yes.
us, that's.
Mr. Jim Cogdill, a good friend of mine, he was your codes officer over here when the building was built. Heck of a nice fellow. Jim's job was to come out and inspect the location to make sure that it's off the property line, off the street, and so forth on it, which I understood he did. All right. All the ways before that time, every time, it was very important that you know whether a sign was on premise or off premise. That was a very key to everything on a sign in the state of Tennessee, on premise or off premise. Well, always before that time, Jim would write it right on the application itself. Must have state approval. Must have. It may not be the exact wording, but very similar to that. What he's meaning was that he'd alert me, Charles, that's an off-premise sign. All right, whenever he did that, I knew that, and he knew it, I'd have to go get a state permit and whatnot to install that sign. He caught him on all the ones up until that. Somehow Jim missed that particular sign, did not catch it. And you know that his job was to go out there and make sure that the foundation was off the property line a certain distance, from the very start. All that had to be put in there right. So Jim just flat missed that thing. By him missing it and not alerting us that it was an off-premise, if it alerted us, Charles, that's an off-premise sign, I got my state permit, we'd have never had a problem. All right. Later on then, it was always an off-premise sign, and I always maintained it. Miss Bess Dixon, whenever she would jump me about the sign, I'd say, now, Bess, look, that's an off-premise sign. She'd say, oh, no, it's not off-premise. That was cut off of the Cracker Barrel property and things like that, that was erroneous. It was not that way. So I've maintained all these years. I've got a case right there, all my paperwork that I've been going back and forth and trying to prove that over the years. That look, it's always been an off-premise sign. So that's where the mistake was made on it. And I appreciate y'all weighing that part in on it. My contention is that it's a grandfathered in, non-conforming sign. Don't cost anybody anything. It does not bother the city over here. To my knowledge, there's been no objection to the sign whatsoever on it, but it's a grandfathered in, non-conforming sign. Columbia Neon owns the sign and has owned it from the very first day it was put up on it. We own the real estate on it. And that's what I'd like for you to weigh in. We need the income from the sign to pay our county's city taxes over here. It's not bothering anybody. I don't believe anybody could voice an objection to the sign.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. If there's anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you'd come to the podium and give us any comments you may have. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for...
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Mr. Stoffel, if you would, please. Yes, sir. In 1975, did you get a state permit for this sign?
No, sir, because Mr. Jim Cogdill did not make me aware that it was off-premise sign when he had the records that would show it was off-premise.
You just told us that he had told you that you knew all the time it was off-premise. Did I completely misunderstand that?
You must have, no, sir.
Okay, well, you point out that on the application, Mr. Cogsgill said had to be installed in accord with state regulations.
That's what Jim personally wrote on that. No, sir. You
So
got
if it was installed as an off-premise sign, it had to have a state tag.
Sir, you got it confused. That permit that I sent you right there is a justification in showing you what Jim had handled on all off-premise signs up until that time. If you check your dates, that's a different sign.
It's your sign application. And it says if it's off-premise, that means you have to have a state permit. And I don't think you ever had
Yes,
one.
but what you're confusing now, if you'll notice, that was the whole motive of this thing, that I was trying to show the city and show you proof that Jim did tell us each time that I would apply for a sign permit and it was off-premise, he would put it right on the application. So that application that you're looking at, that's got Jim's writing on it, is a prior location. Check your dates and so forth there.
So where's your application for the current sign?
You should have it in your file right there. Check your dates on that.
So you gave us a non-related document? You gave us a document not related to this property.
No, you
Yes,
didn't.
that was just a documentation on trying to prove on the prior permits what Jim Cogdill would do. He knew that it was very important that the sign was either on-premise or off-premise. So the off-premise signs, he would put it right on the application stating that I must have a state permit for the off-premise sign. That's why
Is that related to this property, the property at issue?
No, that's, what he's looking at was just an example of how Jim handled his business before.
Okay.
So it really didn't have
sorry.
anything at all to do with this, other than just trying to show y'all how Jim handled his business before that time. And if Jim would have handled it and put it on there on this one, if Jim had to have known it was an off-premise sign.
All right, Mr. Stoffel, there's no date that I can read on that sign where his language is. However, I would like you to look at the first sign permit you handed us, which is the one for the Cracker Barrel mobile sign.
Yes, sir, that's the permit.
And, excuse me, sir, there is a drawing showing an existing building or probably a slab and the existing sign. There is no indication that that sign is on a lot of record that's separate from where.
Yes, sir, the reason for that, I didn't.
That,
Then if you didn't know it, apparently you thought and he thought it was on premise.
I did not know that it was an off-premise sign. That was Jim Cogdill's job, is what I maintained. He's the one that had the records and the drawings and all that there.
All right,
That's the whole motive of trying to get that over.
I understand. Thank you.
well, I guess I'm just Mr. Stoffel, I'm a little bit confused from your letter. And your comments there, you've said that it's an off-premise sign. It's an off-site premise.
Yes, sir,
off-site
it's
premise.
always been an
Always has been?
always
Always has been?
an off-premise sign from the day it was put up, yes, sir.
Okay. And I think you said that you never got a permit from the state.
No, sir, because I was unaware it was an off-premise sign because Jim Cogdill did not
Okay.
alert me that it was
At
off-premise
what time
sign.
did you know it was an off-site? When did you know that it was an
I believe
off-premise?
it was 2003. It's when I got the letter from Cracker Barrel canceling my sign. Let me get my date to be factual.
No, it's okay.
I believe
But it was later on.
yes, sir.
Even after
I believe it's 2013.
this application that was referenced here with the drawing was actually April of 1976.
Correct. That was the first sign.
And that was the
for
application.
Cracker Barrel.
Contractor was Columbia Neon, and there's a drawing, and as pointed out here, that sign is on that triangular lot that's separate from the Cracker Barrel site.
Always been a
So
separate.
you knew it then, right?
I believe about 2013 I knew it at that time.
But you didn't know it then? Were you with Columbia Neon in 1976?
Yes, sir. I personally handled this with Mr. Jim
So
Coghill.
you knew it then, right?
And actually put the sign up.
You would have known it, if you looked at that, you would have known that it
No,
was
sir,
an
I did-
off-site.
I did not know that it was
Did
an
not know.
off-premise sign until 2013, I believe it was.
Okay, okay.
Mr. Tips, looking at this April 2000, or 1976 application shows that the project is one lot of record. There is no indication, had this been, and frankly, I believe Mr. Stoffel is correct. I think that this always has been on a separate lot of record.
Yeah.
But as he said, he didn't know it. There's no indication on this. If this little sketch was fully accurate, there'd be another line down here at, I guess,
Yeah.
say the upper right corner of that triangle, creating another little triangle, which would have been the lot his sign was on. Now, as Mr. Holtz had said, I think everyone thought this was an on-premise sign, and it was treated as an on-premise sign. Now, Mr. Stoffel would have learned it if he didn't know before, and he might very well not have. In 2005, Cracker Barrel built a new store, and they put a bigger, and you've seen it from some of the pictures, a bigger, taller sign on their own lot of record. And obviously, they stopped paying Mr. Stoffel rent on his sign at that time, and so he would have become aware, if not before, he certainly would have become aware in about 2005, 4, 5, or 6, as permits were issued and ultimately the building was completed and they got a certificate of occupancy. At some time around 2005, he would have known that his sign was on a different lot of record. Cracker Barrel had their own sign and didn't need to, and probably couldn't have had to if they would have wanted them. They wouldn't have been able to have two interstate ground signs, right on top of each other like that.
Okay.
So then what happened is that it sat empty for a while, and at some point, a Larry Sims Realtor sign went up. And at that point, the state contacted Mr. Stoffel and said, you've got an off-premise sign, an off-site sign, and you don't have a permit, take it down. And he applied for a permit, and the letter that Mr. Holtz showed you from the state in 2007, I believe, said, no, you can't have a permit. And they were ready to issue an enforcement order. Mr. Stoffel said, I'll change the sign face. I'll make it on premise. I'll say, instead of saying Larry Sims Realtors, which is clearly an off-premise sign, I'll say lot for sale. Well, the state bought it and said, okay, and did not proceed with their enforcement action. Mr. Stoffel withdrew his appeal to the state board. And shortly after that, at some point there was, I can't give you an exact time frame and exactly what started it, but there was conversation with the city and an equivalent notice from the city. You've got a off-premise sign, and then at some point it was, well, okay, you put a sign face up without a sign permit. Some back and forth on that, and city staff elected at that time, and I was part of that conversation with Betts Nixon and Gary Whitaker and Amelia Kerr, and we elected at that time to not contest the fact that lot for sale Larry Sims was an on-site sign. In the big picture, anyway, we elected not to contest that. He sent us an application. He filled out an application to the city that said on-site sign application permit. You had a copy of that shown to you by Mr. Holtz. He signed it. He kept his sign, and I assume Mr. Sims paid him some sign rent over the years. At some point after 17, whenever the windstorm came through and broke Larry's sign, it again sat empty for a while, I believe, and at some point the sign that's up there now. And so now Mr. Stoffel is telling us that he always believed it was on-site. Then he found it was off-site, but he couldn't make the off-site work with the state or the city, and so he went back calling it an on-site, and now wants to again say it's off-site. And I believe Mr. Holtz correctly said, no, you cannot get a city permit for an off-site sign. He hasn't actually filed an application for one. To my knowledge, for that sign, he got an order to take it down, and he's appealing that order. Actually, he had discussed with city staff asking for a variance. We concluded that there was nothing in the sign ordinance or the zoning ordinance which could possibly be the basis for a variance, and he elected to appeal Mr. Holtz's decision, so here we are.
Mr. Stoffel, is that a fair characterization of what you've said and what transpired?
No, sir, I don't think that.
Okay, we're not going to get out. Then I'm not going to get into the he said, she said
Okay.
type thing. But what I did hear you say was it was always supposed to be off-site.
It was
Correct?
The facts are it was always an off-premise sign. Yes.
Supposed to be an off-site sign, always.
It was always an off-premise sign, yes.
Okay.
It was not located on the premise where the business was built, where the
Okay.
building was built. That makes it a off-premise sign. So it was always an off-premise sign. And
Okay.
the only way I got into taking out a permit and all for on premise was that Ms. Brown was 80-something years old. She was in bad health, and I couldn't go to court with anybody because of her condition that she was in. And the city would not recognize myself as the owner of the sign without the property owner being involved in it. So so I had a choice. I had a choice of either paying them the $500 and going with an on-premise application, and with me disagreeing with it from the start. I've got all kind of letters where that I disagreed with. It's always been an off-premise sign, and that's the facts of it. And I would hope the board would weigh it in and say, now look, that was an off-premise sign from the start, and it would be a grandfathered in, non-conforming sign, meaning you couldn't, if it blew down, you probably couldn't put it back up, on that. But as far as keeping it, we need the sign. We need the sign for our use. The people that I'm renting to, that's back behind the Cracker Barrel, they need the sign. So that's what I'm just begging y'all to have an open mind on it.
I understand. And based on what you've said, and based on the fact that it never would have complied with the state as an offsite.
No, sir, that's not right.
That's not right?
No,
I
sir.
mean, that's everything I've heard was
No,
that
sir.
the
No, sir.
state, it
Let me
doesn't
clear-
comply. Let me finish. It said that to comply with the state, it had to be at least 1,000 feet off the interchange.
That's these new codes now.
Okay.
Jim Cogdill, whenever he come out, he had to have had the drawings and all. He had to know that it was an off-premise sign. All right, if Jim would have told me, Charles, that's an off-premise sign, then at that time it was legal to qualify for an off-premise sign with the state of Tennessee.
But you never got the permit.
Oh, but after that time, the laws changed from a 500-foot spacing on the interstate to 1,000-foot spacing on the interstate. So that made it prohibitive now to get the state permit, but I could have in 1976, see. So that's my contention on it. And I've gone to the state now, and I have offered to pay them the back fees on it, $2,000-something of back fees on the thing, which I have done that. I've got records where I have done that on several occasions.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they look, if they miss a sign out here and it wasn't paid on it, you pay the back fees on it. So I have agreed to pay them the back fees on it if that would help out. So that's where it was, but it's always been an off-premise sign.
When the copy of the sign changes, does that negate any grandfathering claims? Or is it kind of okay, you've had it going all this time, and now we're going to change it, so then the 1,000 feet becomes applicable? Is that
Had it
true?
had it stayed an off-premise sign, assuming that it was legally under the state rules, an off-premise sign, and had it continued as that, then there would be at least some chance that the grandfathering would continue. There are billboards in town that are located in places that the city would not allow that billboard to be placed today, but
able to
they're
change it.
grandfathered in under
they could-
state law, and they can remain. And under our state grandfather statute, there's no, it doesn't wear out. You know, it's basically forever,
Okay.
unless it's destroyed or it's changed or abandoned. Now, if it wasn't abandoned before as an off-premise sign, our contention is that it was abandoned as an off-premise sign when he filed a sign application permit, for a sign permit, saying, I want an on-premise sign. And, you know, I don't know what the state's position would be today if a formal application was filed. I do know what the state said in 2007, and they did not give him an off-site permit because it was it was not in compliance with current state rules. The state is not bound by the grandfather statute that applies to zoning ordinances. What we deal with from a grandfather standpoint is 137208, which applies to city and county zoning changes. The state is not bound by those rules. I think if, assuming it was a legal, legitimate, off-premise sign, and the state changed the law, I think the state could come in tomorrow and make you take it down, because they're not, no, they might have to pay you for it in an immediate situation. I don't know about that, but they're not bound by the grandfather provisions, at least not the ones we've been dealing with of 137208.
So, Mr. Stoker, did you apply with the state in 2007?
Yes, sir.
For an off-site permit?
Yes, sir, I applied for the state.
And you were
By that
refused?
time, they had changed the spacing from 500 feet to 1,000 feet.
Okay.
And that knocked it out.
Thank
But
you.
we have got case law and all since that time now that I think would help me in a situation with the state. Another thing you might be aware of with the state law has been found unconstitutional by a federal judge over here at Memphis, and it's in Cincinnati now. They're waiting on a ruling to come down. They don't know which way it's going to come. So the state is in somewhat of a turmoil with the billboard law.
So you had, and you still have, and I guess it's for for Mr. Ives as our legal expert, you had and you still have remedies with either the state or the city to file a suit for this action. Is that correct, Mr. Ives?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't exercise them in the past, which you've explained very adequately why you didn't, so.
Right, and whether that's, whether or not that's a valid reason to not have taken the action he could have taken in 2007 or 8 or 9 or 10, is for someone else to decide. I have an opinion, but that it's not worth much. But yeah, assume that this board agrees with Mr. Holtz and says, does not overrule Mr. Holtz's decision. Mr. Stoffel has a remedy through the writ of certiorari process with the, either the circuit or chancery court here. His remedy, if this board should elect to overturn Mr. Holtz's decision and allow that sign to stay as it is, he will need to have a permit from the state of Tennessee in order to keep it up. If they grant it, then they grant it, and we'll have that sign with us for a while. If the state does not grant him that permit, frankly, I'm not sure what his remedy is. There is an appeal. I don't know precisely what the remedy is, whether it goes to a state appeals board, probably goes to some kind of a state appeals board first, and then ultimately can get into court again if he chooses to do so.
But I thought one of the reasons why Mr. Holtz did not, or place this in violation, was because of the fact that there was no state permit, that a state permit's required prior to the issuance of an off-site application in these situations.
For our rules, it is.
For the
Yes,
city.
he is not applied for. If you overturn Mr. Holtz, then presumably he will apply for an off-site. I don't know. I'm not.
Well, then Mr. Holtz would still have the still have the opportunity to deny
Well,
an
we would-
off-site application.
Under our rules, we would say, put the state permit with your application.
And that's is a prior requisite to an off-site sign.
Yes.
Is to have a state permit.
Right, I mean, our application form says basically attach your state permit.
And at this time, we have an on-site permit for the city of Murfreesboro for this sign, for the prior sign face.
Yes.
There is no current permit application for the current sign face. And upon any change to a sign face, a off-site or an on-site permit application is required by the city.
Because I believe that it is an on-site sign, our city ordinance would require them to submit an application for a face change.
But there is-
State would not come into play,
But there is no state off-site permit for this location.
because it doesn't meet state regulations.
And there's no off-site permit for the city for this location.
Right.
What is currently in place for this location is an on-site permit for a previously existing face of the sign. So,
Go ahead.
so without making application to the state for an off-site permit, without making application to the city for an off-site permit, this sign face was changed despite the fact that what was currently permitted was an on-site application to a previous sign face.
My notice of violation to him was for not getting a permit for changing the sign face. We also put in there that it's our opinion this is an on-site sign and cannot be used the way he's using it. So we told him that he would need to remove the sign face, or we would decide the city court.
So despite the fact that there is a rich history regarding this land, what's currently operable under the city and the state permit process is one on-site permit for a for sale sign on this piece of property.
Well, any on-site signage, but yeah, I mean, currently there is a permit for an on-site sign for lot for sale.
That's what's currently in place, despite any errors or previously existing situations on this piece of property. What is currently in place is still that 2010 permit. And any other application or any other situation, according to city policies and the city ordinance, would be that we would need to ask for an application by anyone, any owner, any situation, and any other sign situation.
Yeah, for any on-premise sign, yes.
We would be asking for an application. And if they were asking for an off-premise sign, they would need to attach the permit previously granted by the state.
Well, what confusing a little bit is when you get a permit for an off-site sign from the state, it's to construct a new one.
But there's never been one.
I know, I understand.
In this situation, we've never had an off. So in order to get a new off-premise sign for the city, we ask for them to attach their permit from the state, correct?
Yeah, and what I was trying to elaborate on, this is a face change for an on-site sign. There is a city permit required. There's not a permit required for an off-site face change.
If a
That makes sense.
previous off-site face change was made, if there was a permit from the state and the city for an off-site sign, they would not need to apply for face change.
Correct, yes.
But that is not, we have an on-site permanent sign application from 2010 here, and no application for an off-site sign, no permit from the state for an off-site sign.
Correct.
Okay. I think I understand all of that. I'm sorry that I needed it spelled out for me.
It took me months to digest and I fully understand all the ins and outs of this. It is complex.
If the hotel that's just to the right east wanted to advertise on that sign, would that be considered an on-site quasi?
No, it's on a separate lot from the hotel.
If somebody re-subdivided these lots and made it the same lot, would that be, then they would still have to apply for an on-site permit, correct?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wheels are spinning. Any further questions? We need clarified. Just so we're clear, we'll need a motion to uphold the decision. Mr. Holtz?
Procedurally, how would we move to uphold or overturn?
It would either be to grant the appeal and overturn the decision, or to deny the appeal, which would uphold the decision.
Okay.
We don't have the variety of factors to be recited or findings that have to be made as in a variance or a site plan approval or something. I mean, it's not a site plan, a special use permit approval. You either grant the appeal or deny it.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and certainly a lot of twists and turns with this application. I guess in trying to boil it down to make a decision, I'm leaning on the last discussion we had, that we have a permit for an on-site permanent sign and had copy at that point of what the city was expecting and what the applicant has signed to put a signature on this application. And based on that, I think that's what we're dealing with, so I'm going to lean towards supporting the city staff, their denial of the permit.
I would agree with Mr. Young. I think Mr. Stofield has made a case for why this might be considered an off-premises sign. However, with respects to the way it's been treated and permitted all along, well, I won't say all along, but as the way it's been permitted and looked at not only by the city but the state, then I think we have to look at it like it is an on-site sign. You know, I would say, in my business, would never say this to most people, but if you feel that strongly about it, and it sounds like you've put a lot of time and effort into it, you know, maybe it does need to go to court. But the fact of the matter is based upon what our job and what we see here today, I would uphold Mr. Holtz's denial.
I want to state for the record, before there's any vote conducted, that after reading through and hearing what he had to say, I also noticed in the last section that the sign that it's advertising for, one of the owners contacted me about this issue yesterday, and I did not discuss it, but I think it's fair to be noted that I'm acquainted with that person, and as such, I think it'd be inappropriate for me to vote one way or the other.
Understand. Thank you.
Well, I know that there's a lot of situations that prevent people from going to court, and if whatever happened in 2007 with regard to the state permit, I know that may not have occurred in the way that Mr. Stoffel would have preferred due to circumstances beyond his control. But through my previous questioning with Mr. Holt, I'm sure everyone is understands where my mind is, that because we have this permit from 2010, I think that's all that the city can act on. And that's where the city is. And so because of that, I feel like Mr. Holt made an appropriate decision in issuing the violation, despite the fact that I'm sure that things happened in the past that we may not have complete clarity on without much further review. But because of this action that occurred in 2010, I don't think we can go back that far anymore. I think this is what we have to rely upon. That's my opinion. Doesn't mean everybody has to have that opinion. And I hate to say it, because I understand being frustrated with things that happen and how things work with any bureaucracy and applications and getting business done. Some things get overlooked and you don't get it done when you need to get it done. So, but that's where I stand, is that, and if, I'll give Ms. Foy the opportunity to speak if she'd like to, but if not, I'm happy to move.
No, I just echo my fellow board members' thoughts. I mean, I think some things have happened in the past, but I think we're sort of stuck with what we have at this point, which I don't think you can pick and choose necessarily, and I see a little bit of picking and choosing here. And so I'll let Ms. King go ahead with the motion that she's about to make, and I'm happy to second it.
Then I'll move to deny the appeal and uphold the decision of Mr. Holt, the city, in the city of Murfreesboro.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
One abstain. Thank you for your time. Our next item, staff reports and other business. Anything under that heading?
I have none.
I have nothing.
All right, we will adjourn.